Hello there. So I'm going to share some things about this case that if you've been following this case, I am most certain that you have not heard. There's a lot of basic facts about this case of an individual who has been diagnosed with autism. His name is Robert Roberson, who is scheduled for execution on October 17th of this month. There are some things that a lot of people have covered in trying to analyze whether or not he's guilty or etc., but there's some things that's not been discussed regarding the brain swelling. And so I have some information for you that's not only important to this case, but it's very important for people to know regarding children because it's not really actually widely known. So here's the case about, it is calls for clemency. And I think a lot of people think, well, if he's had his appeals process, then he's probably guilty because they haven't listened to him. But I want to talk about specifically how the appeals process worked also. Whenever there's new types of evidence, the Texas Board of Parole and then you have the appeals court, there's specific writ habeas, there's specific motions that they can apply for. When there is new evidence, they didn't consider the new evidence. They didn't consider it. They just said procedurally the motion was not properly before them. Now that can mean various things, but the fact that they did not consider the new evidence in this case is very problematic. And this is why I'm calling for legislation that mandates whenever somebody that was involved in the investigation or anybody from a state official says that they made a mistake, it should be considered unconstitutional to proceed with punishment of that person, and they should be mandated by law to grant a new trial. Because it is those people who do the investigation that do lead to the charges, and it goes before the grand jury based on what they're saying. Okay? And then a lot of things can go wrong in the process of prosecution. Certain things don't get heard by the jury or whatever. But when somebody says, such as the lead detective in this case, he said, I made a mistake. So I don't want to also present this case that, and I'm not diminishing the fact that he has autism. I do accept that he has autism, and I'm explaining to you why. It doesn't matter. Even if he didn't have autism, they should be crying out that this case should not proceed. Autism or not, I understand that they're highlighting that he has autism because it does make it more controversial. But autism or not, there's serious problems with how they presented. But it was his condition that, according to the lead detective, this guy had some problems with the law in the past. They didn't like him. They thought it was weird. And he's got a baby, and the baby has brain swelling. That was what caused him to his behavior. There were two factors that led to them immediately just tunnel vision and refusing to consider other things. One, his behavior. Two, brain swelling. This is how there was no bruises, or there wasn't like if you have brain swelling that this baby had, and you don't have a knot on your head, you don't have a fracture, there's nothing externally to give reason for the brain swelling, and you suspect abuse. This is how they come to the shaken baby syndrome. They're like, oh, well, and shaken a baby can cause internal brain injury. It can. But they just tunnel visioned on this guy, and they now know, and I'm going to show you an article with as recent as October 2023. So I think the timeline of his actions are very important to the brain swelling was caused by the pneumonia, and I'm going to show you the evidence of that. And it's not by anybody in news or anybody even related to this case. It's just medical information, peer review medical information. Okay, if it's not peer review, I really don't give it much weight until it meets peer review standard. But in this particular case, he made a comment like, well, I think she must have fallen and hit her head. And they're looking at this guy like, dude, you've been in trouble with the law before, and you're acting really creepy at the time, which he wasn't. This comes to the discussion of his autism. I think that there needs to be a law that mandates that people cannot use their legal platform that it's considered commercial status, because if you're on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere online and you are somebody with a degree and you are, let's say, maybe you're a psychologist, but you don't do the test for autism, or you haven't tested this person, or maybe you're a lawyer, or you're a criminal profiler, or you're a legal analyst, and you are using your platform and you're saying what degrees that you have, and you don't use a disclaimer to say, well, I don't have the authority or the education to declare whether or not this person has autism, then you say, as a matter of fact, that this person does not have autism. I think that that person should be punished. I think that YouTube should not consider that free speech. If just a random person says, oh, I don't believe it, I don't care what they say, I don't believe he has autism. Well, that's freedom of speech, right? If you want to be cringy, I guess that's your right? That's between you and God. But if somebody who's using their platform as somebody who's educated with professional positions and then manipulates and misleads the viewers to think, oh, well, they've got all these degrees, and then, they can say that matter of fact. I think that is discrimination against a person with a medical diagnosis. I think it's abusive, and it should go against YouTube or whatever platform standard of acceptable community behavior. And they should be punished, if not banned. I think there needs to be laws that protect people with medical diagnoses from having people to matter-of-factly say, and they don't have the education, but they present that they do, that this person is not autistic. So here's the thing, here's why I accept his diagnosis, because I have researched, and maybe I've missed it, I accept that, but I have not seen one single word of the state debunking or rebutting his autistic diagnosis. And I find it very problematic that in most of the cases, especially in something as serious as murder, it is part of the system to put them through a mental evaluation, especially if there's maybe opportunity for a plea bargain, or it's just part of the process. And whatever trouble that he had been in before, they never even had him evaluated. He was somebody who went through life, who did not have they fall through the cracks. There's a lot of underdiagnosed people with autism, and they may have just always been kind of considered to be socially awkward or weird or whatever. And it is pretty much statistically proven, it's not an excuse, but a lot of people with cognitive or mental conditions do have tendency to get in trouble with the law, or they make poor judgments. And again, I'm not making an excuse for them. I'm just saying it is widely known that sitting in the prisons across the United States of America, a lot of people with mental problems. And it's not an excuse. I'm just saying you have undertreated people in our country. And so for somebody with the specific condition of autism, having a young baby or a child or toddler is dangerous for the child. I'm not trying to be mean or discriminatory towards people with autism. I'm sure there's plenty of people with autism who well raised their children, probably much better than a lot of people raise their kids. But I'm just saying there are risks with people depending on what, how severe their autism are, because coping mechanisms and the ability to deal with a crying child, something as simple as that, their coping skills could be less. And I'm not saying that there may have been something, that could be considered abuse that he did, or maybe he was short or impatient, or maybe even verbally abusive to the toddler or whatever. There may have been a CPS history of that, but there was never any charges on him for any kind of child abuse that I'm aware of. And even if there was, when it comes to whether or not somebody is guilty of murder, it is the but-for factor, and that is, but for this person's action, this person would not have died. Period. It really is that black and white when it comes to the elements of murder, manslaughter, or whatever they're charged with. And in this case, it was the two factors that led a detective in the system to go after him. So the history was, when his child went sick, he did the appropriate thing. He took the child repeatedly to the doctor. And this is where I believe the brain swelling was caused from the virus, because this particular virus can cause brain injury and death, and did. They tested the lung tissue of this baby, and it was that virus that killed the baby. It was not him violently shaking a baby, okay? And they may have even known he had autism or suspected it, and then looked at him as being violent and impatient with the child because of that. It was discriminatory nonetheless. Whether or not you accept that he has autism, whatever your position is on that. Here's what I'm going to show you about what caused the brain swelling. And if you are somebody with a small child, grandchild, please know the seriousness of respiratory conditions now are known that can lead to serious brain injury and death. It's not, I mean, respiratory systems, there's so many viruses, and it's actually very common, right? But the fact that they're now known that can cause brain swelling, and they never tested this baby's spinal fluid, or even considered that this baby coming into a hospital with a temperature of 104.5 and having a respiratory virus, the brain swelling could have been caused by that. They were so biased in how they handled this case. Now, this is just medical information. It has nothing to do with legal cases. It's just medical facts. So this is your PNC PubMed Central. If you want to do some research, it's your NCBI NLMNIH.gov. I'm so sorry. My camera's not. Anyways, I'll put a link in the description, okay? Neurological. Oh, come on, camera. Give me a break. I'll just read it. Alterations due to respiratory virus infections. Oh, goodness. CNS pathologies are caused by known neurotropic viruses such as measles, herpes, HIV, among others, but nowadays respiratory viruses have placed themselves as relevant agents responsible for CNS pathologies. Among these neuropathological viruses are the HRSV, the influenza, COV, HMPV. These viral agents are leading cause of acute respiratory infections every year, affecting mainly children under 5 years old and also to the elderly. Up to date, several reports have described the association between respiratory viral infections with neurological symptoms. The most frequent clinical manifestations described in these patients are febrile or febrile seizures, status epilepticus, encephalopathies. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Encephalopathies. You nurses out there, help me out. Encephalitis. These cause brain swelling, people. This baby had a temperature of 104.5, and they gave her medicines that are now known to even just cause the respiratory system to even suffer more. All of these viruses have been found in cerebral spinal fluid, which suggests that all of these pathogens, once in lungs, can spread throughout the body and eventually reach the CNS. Okay? The current knowledge about the mechanism and routes used by these neuroinvasive viruses remains scarce. But in this particular case, when he took that baby to the hospital, okay, he did what he was supposed to do as a parent. Regardless if he had any faults as a parent or any problems legally, he did what he was supposed to do, and they gave that baby medicine that should have never been given to him. And I want people to seriously look at anybody who thinks that they can talk about somebody with autism and not having medical license to declare that they don't, like I've literally heard somebody call him a sociopath because they don't believe they have autism. Oh my gosh, seriously. Wow. I'm just praying for that person, that's all I can tell you. But I think that there needs to be legislation that when a person who is a lead detective, goes to this man and looks him in the face and says, I am so sorry for how I judged you at that time, because his emotions, he had a flat effect. And this guy looks at him with not an ounce of bitterness in his eyes. He was just so sweet. And I have seen people who've been wrongfully accused just filled with bitter, and the people are not forgiving in the comments of that detective. I forgive him because he understands how they did have tunnel vision. He understands how the system that he was a part of was was biased, and he has taken steps to make it right. And so I do forgive him, and I just pray that they don't execute him on October 17th. And I am so tired of reading. I went to law school many years ago, and I went to paralegal school, and I wanted to be a researcher, basically. And I did go to law school, and I've read so many cases since that time of how the judges, it's like it doesn't even matter if there's evidence that proves that they're innocent. They just go on procedural rules, and it's killing people. So I think that they need a specific law that states that it is unconstitutional to take a person's liberty if a person who charged them says, I made a mistake. Please undo the mistake. And in the state of Oklahoma, they're going to execute Richard Glossop, which I've always believed, at the very least, he should have a new trial, because the person was only one person that accused him. And he got a deal, and he later recanted. And the Attorney General, which is very rare, because he's conservative, and he's crying out. He's like, look, the state made a mistake. Please do not execute this man, right? And I think that when somebody who has an official position, or who, especially somebody directly related to the investigation that led to the charges, speaks up and says, we made a mistake, I think that should mandate a new trial. I think it should be considered unconstitutional to continue to punish that person, right? And I believe what the Bible says, that on the testimony or witness of two or more people, and obviously, our day and age of knowledge, when there's evidence, but when you have people who are saying we made a mistake, who literally are the ones that prosecuted them, I think it should be considered unconstitutional to take that person's liberty. I don't think it should be based on what judge says or some governor. The governors are politicians. And when I called the number today to, I signed the petition to not execute them, and I called the governor's office. Oh, actually, you call a number and it asks you your zip code, and then it will transfer you literally to the governor's office, who are set up to take calls, and they're taking consensus on this case. So I asked them specifically, I said, is the governor considering this case? And they said, well, we're taking tallies. And so that's politics. That's a governor who is worried about his elective position, okay? And that's problematic. That's not how somebody should be determined to be set free or not. That, again, we need specific legislation that says when somebody who isn't part of prosecuting them said, I made a mistake, and especially a state official, it should mandate a new trial, period, right? And in this particular case, you have so many, 80 lawmakers, and it's bipartisan. It's both Democrat and Republican who are saying, don't execute this man. And it's not just because he's been diagnosed as autistic without anybody from the state to rebut the fact that he's autistic. So shame on anybody who thinks they're going to use their position to debunk him. I think that they need a law to pass saying that anybody who's discriminating and using a platform to use your education and act like your education is a position gives you to say that somebody doesn't have a medical condition, that should be considered legally discriminatory, because you are getting money and you're using that position commercially, and YouTube should not be allowed to get by with that, right? I think advocates for disabilities and specifically autism should be speaking up against YouTube allowing anybody to act like that. It'd be different if the state said, well, we tested him and yeah, we don't believe he's autistic. That would make it different. But nobody from the state has debunked him being autistic. No one. And what I see is lawmakers and the state's own Democratic and, well, there's both Democrat and Republican legislators calling on him to not be executed. And the fact the governor's office has taken a consensus, but they're asking for zip codes, I think he cares more about what the Texas people are saying. So if you are somebody from Texas, oh my goodness, please rally Texans. Use your Texan zip code because apparently it's more important to him what Texans think. I'm just saying that's speculative, but I'm just fact they're asking for zip codes when you call in. But please do call in. I'll put a link in the description. Okay, the medical people are like, oh my gosh, this guy's innocent. The lawmakers are saying, oh my gosh, this guy's innocent. And nobody has debunked him being autistic, guys. He truly, I believe he's autistic. If you just watch him, the interview that he did with the lead detective when he went to visit him and apologized to his face, I accept it. And so I apologize for the blurriness in my camera here. I have it set to a lower quality or whatever, just because it's going to be, longer video and takes up storage and takes longer to upload. But I'm begging you to please sign this petition and please share this. And we joined together can bring better law. Please believe that even if you're just one person, never ever give up hope that you can't be a part of change. Unity is power, and we need to set up a law that mandates that when somebody says we made a mistake and they're a part of the prosecution and a part of the state, official people, like I'm talking, prosecution staff members. I'm not talking about somebody who just recanted their testimony, though that's important too. But I'm talking about when the state's own people say we made a mistake. It should be unconstitutional to continue to punish that person. Don't you think?